Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Cabrera. I'm one of the speakers here at Samson Properties, and I would like to talk to you guys about influence. It's a big subject to talk about, mainly because our industry creates successes for people to be able to have more business if you know how to influence others. So it's very important that you work on this particular skill set, and there's a lot of techniques I'm going to show you guys today. There's a lot of things that we are going to be discussing that would make a huge difference in your career. The most successful real estate agents out there, the top producers, are the biggest influencers. And there's many ways to approach influence and influence people out there. And this is what we're going to talk about today. We'll start off with the definition of influence. The definition of influence is the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of someone or something, or the effect itself. So what this means essentially is you create the outcome on any given conversation or communication with an individual or a group of people. So it's very important to understand that in order for you to sell homes, you need to be able to a certain degree influence the people around you. Before you even get clients, you start out with prospects or center of influence, people that you can influence out there. Family members, friends, community groups, community members, social media. The biggest influencers out there are the ones that are most successful. If you notice how success are derived, you can either innovate something that people need, or you can influence people for you to attract and then create the need. So in terms of how it relates to our real estate field, picking up listings will require you to influence the seller to agree on certain terms at some point when you get offers come in. As a buyer's agent, you need to learn how to influence a buyer to offer a reasonable amount that the seller would more than likely would accept or have a high probability of accepting. Representing a client does not mean that they're always going to get the lowest price. Representing a client means that your best interest is with your client. So to influence them in some way or another to go a direction that would more than likely to their benefit is very critical for you to be able to sell houses in the real estate field. So buying a home requires for information to be provided to the buyer. And your job is to provide that buyer an honest, unopinionated as much as possible advice. And that advice will create that influence with that client. There's many types of influence that you're going to see out there. Influence by force is very common. When we're teaching our kids, when they're little kids, we become more like an authoritarian to them, or we do the authoritarian approach, where we tell our kids, this is it, you have no choice, you have to follow this, and that's that. So that, in effect, gets the child to behave a certain way. So that is an influence, but it's not a long-lasting influence, because once you're not there, your authority is no longer there, they would more than likely gravitate back to where you don't want them to be. So relating that back to real estate, when you tell your clients what to offer in a property, and you tell them you have to offer this, otherwise you don't get the house, they may comply with your authority because you're the authority in this field, but they may also replace you with someone who's more consultative, someone who's more empathetic of what their needs are if they feel like they will benefit from that. So it's very important for you to understand that an authoritarian approach does work, but it only works when you're around. The other one is the punishment approach, or what they call consequential approach. You tell a person, a client, listen, if you don't write this offer, you're not going to be able to buy a house at all, or you're not going to be able to buy a house. So the punishment is you're going to lose this property, right? So you could relate that to other things, but in our field, this is where I'm actually here today. We're going to be discussing how you can apply your influence to your clients. So when you're talking to a client and you tell them a consequence of their behavior or their actions, again, if the consequence happens to them, then they may be more convinced. But what if it doesn't happen to them? Then they may, again, replace you with someone else that would more cater to what their needs are, because they don't look at you as an expert anymore. Then you have the coercion approach. You kind of make it look like everything has to flow a certain way. As long as it flows a certain way, I give you an example. If a client sees a lot of buyers going into a home, and a buyer walks in there and they think that they're going to be competing, and you say, yes, the other, I spoke to the other agents, and the other agents more than likely going to offer higher, and it's putting them in a position that everybody's offering higher, so you should offer higher. Well, it doesn't always work. It's not the only way to get a client or get a client's contract to push through. There's other factors, like whether a home inspection would be done as for informational purposes only, or inspection could be done before you write the offer. Offering a higher amount also make a big difference. Asking for seller contribution could be another scenario. So there's not just the price that you're looking at, right? But if you're just kind of steering your clients a particular direction, once they figure that out, again, you might be replaced. And involuntary, and feeling like that's the feeling that the client is not voluntarily wanting to do certain things. So when you're kind of putting that burden on the client to accept what you're telling them because they have a certain amount of respect for you. In the beginning, it might work again, but if it didn't come from them, the decision, it will not stick. So towards the end of your transaction, they may back out and get cold feet. So those things, new agents a lot of times make those mistakes. I've made those mistakes before when I first started in the business, where I pushed my client to buy the house, and towards the end, they got cold feet because they feel like it wasn't them who made the decision, it was me. So it's very important when you're trying to influence others that you have to get their input. Hence, the better approach is influence by cooperation, which means the client is voluntarily giving you what their decision is. So it's very important in regards to that incremental cooperative approach. To me, the way I look at this is you could incrementally or in small agreements to get your clients to agree to certain things. And as you get them to agree to certain things, you build up to the bigger things. I'll give you an example. If there's different terms on a contract, you have the home inspection, you have the price, you have, let's say, seller contribution, or even like a home warranty. You have those things already laid out on the contract. Well, for you to get them to agree on certain things, let's say you want to get them to agree on the price, you may start with get them to agree with how much closing help they can get, or if there's any closing help they can get. So you take the smaller pieces of the contract and you break it down and get them to agree in certain things of the contract. Of course, when negotiation occurs, a lot of the times they have to feel like they're getting something out of it as well. So with those increments, we'll build up to something that's important to you. So if the more important part is to be able to get the seller contribution, so sometimes you will have to bump up the price to get the seller contribution, but if that's the more important piece, then you get them to agree with the other pieces first, and then as you get them to agree on the other pieces, they're more positive about agreeing to being able to actually get less seller contribution, let's say, if you're trying to push the contract through and increasing the price by breaking it down as well to the monthly payment that they're going to pay. So looking at it from incrementally trying to build it up that way. Feeling of accomplishment or reward. You talk to your client and you let them know that there is a positive thing to purchase this property. Their family can move in sooner. Their extra month that they actually don't have to pay if they have a mortgage instead of a rental, because the rental is paid up front and the mortgage paid in arrears. So you have like a good 30 days. You're going to skip a payment. So you're looking at the rewards of why they would purchase now rather than not purchase at all. Or maybe how the market is going. Get your client to research what the market is doing. If we're going to have a market crash, it would be a better time to do it later. But if the market is increasing like this year, 2021, it looks like the market might be increasing, then you let them know that they may buy now rather than later. So that's the whole idea of, and the reward of that is the possible equity they're going to get, the interest rates being low, those kind of things. So you bring up the positive things or the rewards of purchasing a home in regards to convincing them that they should move forward with their transaction. Feeling of loss or hopelessness. There's sometimes this is used, but it can also backfire on you. But a lot of the times I tell stories about how some of my clients, especially on the listing side, when they had an opportunity to sell their home, and I specifically told them, hey, I've been in the 2001 crash and the recovery in 1994 when I first started in the business. We're going to have a crash coming up, and this was a 2007. And I mentioned to them, you're getting the most out of your home. You may want to actually cash out now rather than later, because you might not be able to cash out later. Well, sure enough, they get an offer for $930,000 on their property, but then they didn't want to take the offer because they wanted $1 million. And I told them, I said, listen, this is the best offer you can possibly have. Usually the first offers are the best offers you'll get on the property. And the longer the property sat, they decided later on not to list the house. A year later, the market crashed. They ended up short selling the house at $650,000, where they could have made a couple $100,000 at the time, 12 months prior. So looking at it from a feeling of loss, I was mentioning to them the feeling of loss if they had not done it. So I tell these stories to some of my clients because at some point, what goes up comes down. And if you're looking at it from that perspective, you have to be able to explain to your client where we are on the marketplace, or they can do their own research and figure out if this is a good time to actually sell the property. And a lot of times they would convince themselves it's much better than you trying to influence them to go that direction. But just influence them to research is actually very good to begin with. Reciprocity approach, looking at it from being able to get something for something. Use this a lot when I'm trying to market. I invite people a lot to different events. Right now, of course, during this moment, we're not able to do that, but I usually invite them to events that I have every quarter, and allows me to be able to initiate a phone call every quarter. So I'm in touch with them at least 4 or 5 or even 6 times, or even 7 times a year, which is very important on the long-term scenario because it allows you to be able to communicate and keep in touch. But the more important part is the fact that I invite. So I invite, they don't show up, right? So I invite the second time, they don't show up. First, they don't respond. The second time, they might respond, say, oh, I can't make it. Third time I invite them, they're feeling really bad. And usually the reciprocity on that comes back as a referral. So it's very important to have a pool of people that you're inviting on a consistent basis so they feel like you're really thinking about them. But then guess what? They're not thinking about you. So eventually after 6 months, a year, 2 years of doing this, it starts to grow in their conscience like, oh, Mark cares so much about me. Even my own sister don't call me that often. And then you get a situation where the person reciprocates with a referral. Of course, you're going to need to teach them how to refer business to you, which is very important. Otherwise, the whole thing doesn't really work as well. So reciprocity, being able to give something, and the Hare Krishnas actually were good back then in the 70s when they were used to giving flowers to people for for being able to get donations. You could do the same thing for something like a book. I have a book that I market on social media as well. And at the very end of this slides, you will see that there's a book there that's a sample. I give it for free on a electronic version, or I give them a physical book. But either way, the purpose of that is for me to give something of value, and in return, either they refer business or they become my client. So the reciprocity approach is very good for influencing people to work with you. So this is how I use influence in my business. It's very successful on that part. So why learn to influence? You learn to influence to be able to sell more houses, of course. And the more you influence people out there, and when I say that, what I sometimes do is I plant a seed in their head if they don't own a house yet. So if they're currently renting, I tell them the stories again. I tell them stories why it would be beneficial for them to buy a home, because one of my clients actually bought a home several years ago, and now it's this amount. They have savings, and we refinanced for 15 years, or they rented it out after 20, 30 years. It's paid off. Now they're getting income out of it. So it's more for your future than for what it is now, because whatever you're paying your landlord, you're making your landlord rich. So that's a type of influence that you create by kind of telling them stories of your past clients. And if you don't have past clients, borrow somebody else's story. I mean, this is really what the best part about it. So, I mean, if you have a team leader or mentor, someone that's helping you in this business, it's great to borrow their story, because, you know, as long as you know how to tell it, it makes a huge difference. Helping more people. So helping more people in this business is the reciprocity kind, where like the other day I received a call, someone needing help to actually modify their mortgage. Well, I know a little bit about it. Well, I know a lot about it because I've helped 86 families keep their home when we went through the crisis, the mortgage crisis. So, but what I don't do is I don't do the modification for them. I just point them to the right direction, let them know what to expect when they talk to the mortgage company, let them know that there's like certain programs are available out there that they can pursue, but let them do the work themselves, and I don't charge them anything. What I do is I give my time and my expertise, because I happen to know the business very well, and let them do the work. So then I don't become responsible for not modifying their mortgage. But what that does is, again, it's a reciprocity scenario. What that does is that if their modification fails, it becomes a short sale. And that short sale, since I'm the one who's been trying to help them this whole time, they give it to me for me to sell their property. And then on top of that, it becomes a rental, because they need to find another property. So I don't know how many times I've done this, probably a good 200, 300 times at least, and I've sold properties this way. It's very effective. The reciprocity makes a huge difference. So that's the other part you got to think about when it comes to influencing people. Changing your lifestyle. This whole influence changes your lifestyle. You can not only you can influence people that is related to the real estate part, but it also, you are able to influence people outside of the real estate. Sometimes when you need to deal with your credit card companies, or you need to deal with the dealership for something, knowing how to influence people and getting them to do the things that you need from them is very important. So one of the techniques that I use is I put them on a pedestal, already getting them to feel that they're already doing their job very well. So then it compels them to go up to that level of doing their job. So, or even more, they try to exceed that because they feel good about the compliments I'm giving them, putting them on a particular standard that they put themselves in because I put them on that standard. If you understand what I'm saying, that's basically a good way to influence people as well. Stroking their egos in that sense, but not necessarily being flattering, too flattering, but looking at it from what qualities that they're showing that's positive, and reflecting upon them and letting them know that they're doing a great job, or they're being, thank you for taking your time out here working with me on this, things like that. For agents, a lot of times I mention to them that if they're coming across professional, I bring that up. Hey, listen, this is one of the easiest transactions you get to work with because you make it easy, because you're very professional at what you do. What that does is it put them in a professional level. It kind of like, okay, well, he thinks I'm professional, though, so I'll behave like I'm a professional. So it's very important to know that and understand, to influence people, there's many ways to do it, and one of the ways is this. Create a success in life. This applies to everything, like I told you before. Creating successes in your life, whether you're buying a boat or buying a car, there's certain push and pulls that you do. I've gotten referrals from car salesperson. I've gotten referrals from my haircut person, my hairdresser. I've actually had changed 4 or 5 times hairdressers just because each time I get my hair done, I end up getting a client out of it, or 2. They refer their mother, their sister, their cousin. And you know what? They're captive audience because they're cutting your hair. They're going to be there for the next 20 minutes or 30 minutes. If you go to a hair salon and get your hair done, I guess sometimes, women actually take about 2 hours sometimes, and they're just sitting there. So they get to know their hairdresser. So with me, I got about 30 minutes because I don't have too much hair to cut. But it allows me to have a captive audience. And that captive audience, for me, is a very critical moment for me to be able to influence that person to work with me on referrals and tell them stories about how great I've done with some clients that I've had. But they sit there and they have no choice. But at some point, when you brainwash them enough, it works. So successes in life also happens, of course, based on financial. So the more houses you sell, your lifestyle change. You have more flexibility with your time. You're able to do the things that you normally are not able to do if you're so busy chasing your bills at the end of the month. So it's very important for you to learn these techniques. And I didn't bring up earlier, there was one thing I wanted to bring up about incremental. It's kind of funny, as a matter of fact. Incremental cooperative approach, or a incremental approach. There's a story that one of my mentor actually was telling me. It was kind of funny. There was a farm owner, a very wealthy farm owner, had a person helping him with that farm, an employee. So one day the employee calls him and says, boss, we have a problem here. I've been watching the farm and your bird died. So incrementally he kind of trying to break the news to the boss. And the boss said, what? The bird died? How did it die? Well, it got wet because the horses, we had to use the horses and to actually put out the fire, and the horses died. How did the horse die? Because we had to take the water to try to put out the fire. It's like, so how come there was a fire? Well, it was during a wake. The wind blew and it hit the candlelight, and it actually took the whole place and had engulfed the whole place with fire. And the boss said, wait a minute, why did you have candlelights in the house to begin with? Oh, because we had a wake. And the bosses said, wait a minute, you had a wake? For who? Oh, it was for your mother. Your mother actually passed away. It's like, what? My mother passed away? How did she pass away? Well, she was trying to get into the house and she didn't have a key, and she tried to break in through the window and I shot her. So basically, the whole story goes, to break the news, it's something similar to, I guess, our real estate business. Sometimes we get really major stuff. You got to break it into little pieces. So then at the very end, it's not so shocking, because if he started with the mother, probably the boss is probably like freaked out. But then with all the things that happened, it wasn't so bad, because already pretty much the whole place is done. So not only he lost his mom, he lost the whole house, lost the whole farm. So the point I'm trying to make is, you can break it down into small bite-sized pieces, the bad news, as well as, of course, being able to convince your client to go a certain direction for good news, which means you get them to feel like they're going to say yes to each thing that you're gonna say. So at the very end, they just say, "Oh yeah, sure, no problem." I mean, we've been saying yes this whole time, right? So it's also creating that consistency that they feel like they don't really have a direction, but the direction you want to take them. But as long as, like I said, the decisions are being made by them, that's the most important part of this whole process. So, raising your children to be disciples. Create success in business life. Of course, we talked about that already with the real estate, since everybody here in this audience that we have are in the real estate business. This influence will help you with your business, and I gave you already plenty of different ways to approach this influence. Raising children to be your disciples. The best thing that I've learned from this is raising children to be your disciples is the whole idea that you have a certain amount of empathy to your children, and having that empathy creates that environment of communication for your children, and explaining to your children why they shouldn't do certain things rather than just telling them not to do it and not giving them explanations. So being able to understand their position, what age they're in, and what they're thinking about makes a big difference in how you approach. Rather than just telling them no, you actually explain to them why they shouldn't do it. So makes a big difference. Influence the children huge on that part. Lead people to success. We talked about that already. Build an organization. Building an organization requires a massive amount of influence, which means what's the benefits that you're giving to the people that want to follow you or grow your particular industry or your organization, your business. For people to follow you, they have to feel not only that they're going somewhere, but also that you care about them. And this is very important when you're having communication with your team members or your employees, depending on how big your business is, or somebody that you look up to. It makes a big difference if they're listening to this today to understand your position and why you have to make certain decisions and get them to feel like they want to be in the business. At Samson, what I've found is the culture of really helping each other, and everybody seemed very good at explaining certain things here. And not only that, the idea that the culture is about growth and the culture is about caring about each other. It comes from the top, and it makes a big difference. So, Donnie and Danny here in this company makes a huge difference in terms of how they treat people. And they treat people very well. Leadership helps companies grow, and that leadership requires a positive influence on everyone else. So to be a productive person in society, this is also influence. Certain organizations, nonprofit organizations, are out there to promote certain things, public safety or different important factors of fundraising for, let's say, cancer. So they have to be able to touch people's hearts and influence them to donating to their cause because it's somehow beneficial. So all these things apply in terms of how we can be more influential in our area of life, not just in real estate. Buying a house. You make your clients think that the reason why they want to buy a house. This is very important, whether they're not even on the market yet. See, the best clients that you're going to have out there, to be honest with you, are the ones that they don't look at you as a commodity, because you were the one who implanted the idea and help it grow to the point that they want to buy a house. So you have to figure out the why behind a buyer or a seller, particularly a buyer, why they want to buy a home. And in that way, then you can start applying the influence that you have, knowing the field, knowing what you know in the business, and letting them know, hey, listen, buying a house right now might be a good idea because the interest rates are low. And your monthly payment can go towards more of your principal than the interest. And it's a fixed rate that actually beats the inflation over time. So I don't know how many of you guys use that, but inflation, we have had inflation for the longest time. Anytime they print more money than what we normally have, creates a devaluation of the money, of the dollar, let's say. Well, if you get a fixed rate right now for the next 30 years to pay off that property, you will beat inflation because you're getting the money on today's value, not in later value if you kept the money yourself. So by borrowing the money, you're getting, let's say, 2.75% interest or 3% interest rate, and that's stuck there for the next 30 years. So whether the inflation kicks in or not, your monthly mortgage payment is going to be always the same. As a matter of fact, it might be to your benefit if the inflation kicks in and your income goes up, then the payment that you're paying your mortgage is a lot less in comparison to your income. So that's one way to beat inflation. So this is some of the techniques that you use to let them know that there's a benefit to why they're purchasing a home outside of paying it off, of course, but also beating inflation at the same time. You also got to make it look like the transactions that you do and the process is easy, because some people get overwhelmed trying to purchase a home, especially if they just got a new job and they moved to the area and they're still trying to settle in, and then now you got to toss on top of that the requirements for mortgages, that kind of stuff, the requirements for purchasing a home, being able to go out there on a regular basis trying to look for houses. Try to make it easy and break it down to smaller pieces. What I normally do is I get them approved completely. When I say completely, all the documents, paperwork been submitted to the bank, underwriters looked at it and they said, okay, we can lend this money to this person for this amount. Then at least that is out of the way. And then we move to the next step, which is basically getting an idea of what they're looking for, putting it on a auto email type scenario, searching it together. It's very important. And then scheduling appointments to see the house and looking at it from the most important homes that they want to see first and going forward from there. So it's very important to understand that breaking things down into smaller pieces makes it a lot easier for clients to digest the difficulty of purchasing a home, and makes it a lot easier. And the easier you make it for them, the more they will talk about you to other people. Sense of urgency and why you. The sense of urgency is, to me right now, is the way the market is, the interest rate being so low. It's an all-time low, so monthly payments are actually better, and you can buy more house for the money right now based on the interest rate. So, and all that stuff can flip at any given moment. It's really hard to kind of figure out when the best timing is. It's the best timing for them if they're planning on living in this property for the next 3 years or more. To me, it makes sense, because if you're only going to live there for 2 years, then you might not build enough equity that the downturn of a market might allow you to actually have equity on the property. So those are the things that you have to look at when you're looking at working with your buyers. Why sellers would list the property with you? Well, there's only really 2 reasons. They trust you and they like you. They would trust you if they already know you. If you grew up with them, or you went to school with them and you were or best friends with them, or your own family members, because they know you. And they know if you can be trusted or not. So if you've been living a good life where you've been honest to people around you, then that's much of an easier way to actually gain trust, because you already built it up before you even got into the real estate business. They know the people you know. That happens a lot when you're being referred. That's the next best thing for trust. So you took care of a friend of theirs, or their mother, or their cousin, or their brother or sister. That person is already raving about you, or talking about you and how good you've done for them. So the person that's coming in right now can trust you that you would be able to do good for them. It makes a big difference, I think, gaining trust. But you can't take trust for granted. You have to earn it as well. So once the person walks into your office, or you meet with a person, or you talk to the person, you try to make sure that the trust is always solid as possible, making sure that things are working out on that note. Because at the end of the day, if they can trust someone else more than you, they more than likely will go to someone else. They know the company you work at. This has become important for some people. Some people like brand names. I had a client before that actually came up to me and said, you know what, I'm going with you because I know the company. So I was like, great. I never met you, and I don't know the person at all, of course. But that's where the beginning of the trust That's where everything begins. The fact that he can trust the company, guess what? Let me work on you trusting me. Because guess what? There's more people in this company than myself. I don't want you to be switching to another agent in the same company because you trust the company, but maybe you don't trust me. So building your trust requires certain things. And one of those is your honesty, or being able to tell them up front what's going on. Not trying to kind of make it sugarcoat, make things bigger than what it is, or embellish it. When people see that, basically they kind of you chip away on the trust factor, even though you already instantly have it from the minute that you sat down with them. So it makes a big difference being able to tell them the pros and cons on things that are happening. Giving them choices is very important. Remember, the more choices you give them, the more probability that they're going to be the one making the decision, and they don't feel like you're making the decision, or they don't have a choice. When people feel like they don't have a choice, it only takes a minute for another agent to come in there and say, hey, look, you have other choices. Why come the other agent didn't tell you this? So it's very important that when you're sitting down with your client, is to get them to understand that they have choices, and you show them each choices. You tell them exactly what direction each choice can bring them. So they have more of a decision to the whole process than just you telling them what to do, which we talked about earlier as an authoritative or authoritarian approach. Honest and trustworthy, that's really your personality. You need to develop that yourself. Either you have it or you don't. But if you don't, you can always work on it. Figure out how you can be more trustworthy, which means do some self-help, some personal development, and figuring out what makes people trust people, the psychology of that. That's very important to understand that people can have an impression of you within 5 to 10 seconds of meeting you, or even longer, a little bit longer, maybe 30 seconds, a minute, depending what comes out of your mouth. Makes a big difference, I think. So the other part is liking you. So to get a person to have connection is to try to get them to like you. This is the way I look at it. Now, you might look at it a different way, but finding common interests is very important. Like having, they like your personality. Sometimes I kind of mimic what my client is saying, or show them that, hey, you know what? I can see that our personality are more alike than what most people might think, or you might think. Because, and then I explain certain things, and the person like, oh yeah, you're right. So I observe the person, I figure out exactly what our common elements are, and one of them happened to be a personality scenario where I can see exactly how he makes a decision and how thorough he is in terms of looking at the listing agreement, and how everything has to be in writing in our business, and I believe the same way. So I mimic some of the things that he's doing to get them not only to trust me, but also to get them to like me. And it makes a big difference when you pay attention to those, because a lot of times people don't. And they don't bring out the best quality of the people that they're talking to. And it's very important that you bring the best quality of the people you're talking to. The other part is to present yourself as kind and sincere. Well, I would hope everybody's kind and sincere, but the reality is we don't always come across that way. So if you're going to meet somebody, if a choice is to meet somebody and you're in a terrible mood, work on your mood, or don't meet that person at all, because it's not going to benefit you in any sense. You've helped them in the past, makes a big difference. Like your history of helping them before, you can kind of bring it back into the picture so that they remember how kind you were to them, or how helpful you were to them, how you were able to actually help their family. I have a client that's literally like refinanced or purchased like 3 houses with me already, and then also did like four of his family members. So now he's going on his 3rd property. So it makes a big difference. I feel it makes a big difference if you constantly remind them that you had these great things that we've already done, so then we can just keep moving forward. So that's a huge thing. When you're picking up a listing, if you've helped their family members, you tell them how you helped their family members. You tell them how positive it was, what's the great things that happened during that transaction. How to sell your listing at top dollar. this is one of the things that a lot of the sellers would like to hear from you. So the first thing that I would do is I would educate them over the type of market we're in. If we're in a buyer's market, right, you have to understand that people are more likely to negotiate something with you, with the seller. On a seller's market, it's the opposite. You want the seller to have more convenience in the market in terms of being able to sell their house. If they can sell it as is, that's great. Certain things are important. So if you're looking at it from being able to sell the property at the top dollar, you have to educate your seller of where to put the property price. At the end of the day, there's only really one good price. It's the correct price. When I say correct price, on a seller's market right now, which we're in, the correct price is not putting the price on the top. It's still putting the price in the middle. So then you get so many offers come in. Now you have more control on how far you can take the price to go up without actually killing the transaction with the appraisal. Now, if you put it on a market on a higher price, you'll get less offers, less options, less things you can remove from the contract. So for your client's benefit. So it's very important that you price it the way it needs to be priced, which is the correct price. So guide the buyer's agent to the type of offer that could be acceptable to the seller. You're not going to give them a specific price, but you could also kind of move them along a direction where, hey, listen, can you put your highest and best offer in this property? We have XYZ amount of offer. Of course, if your seller allows you to disclose. Right now, we're already over the full price amount. You know, we have like 6 offers, 7 offers. So kind of calculate exactly how would you want to do that with your clients. Hopefully that you and I can work together, because you're such a professional out there in this business, and I can feel that you and I could work together if you give a better offer than what you already sent out. So these are the things that you want to kind of work with the client. And if you notice, I mentioned, hey, you're a professional, you're good at what you're doing. It's very important to do that, because in order for you to get the top dollar for your clients and sell the property at the top dollar, you need to understand that you have to have that rapport also with the buyer's agent to make them feel that they're going to benefit from this transaction, that you're a professional as well. Not only that, that you're not difficult to work with. So there's agents out there, they get on their ego and actually they think just because they got the listing that they can mistreat people. And I'm pretty sure some of you guys ran into that situation before. It's unnecessary, okay? For you to influence people a certain way, you have to get them to feel good about you. So then what comes out of your mouth is meaningful for them, rather than having them feel like an adversary and make them feel that they have to fight with you. Then they're more than likely not cooperate, or if they're forced to cooperate, only to a certain degree until you come up with the issues, then they're going to pound at you to try to get whatever they can get for their buyers. So it's very important to be aware that when you're dealing with other agents, treat them with respect as well as much as you would want to be treated with respect. It's very important. Prepare the seller for a lower price than expected. I'm a firm believer of under-promising but over-performing. So a lot of times when I'm sitting with my seller, if I want to convince them to list with me, right, I will try to get the listing first. But once I have the listing, also just keep reminding them, listen, the first few weeks of this listing is going to be the most critical part of our moment, being able to sell your house at the highest price. So be aware that there may be offers that come in lower, but we can always work with it to try to bring it to the level where it's acceptable to you. But just keep in mind, there may be lower offers that come in. And by preparing them for that, then when they do receive a lower offer, they're not like shocked that they don't want to do anything or be able to negotiate back. So being able to prepare your influence ahead of time is very important. So you talk to them about the possibilities of getting lower offers, or if you know the possibility that you might not get a lot of offers to begin with, because some clients think that we're going to get an offer all of a sudden, a lot of offers just because you put the property in the market. Well, it doesn't always work that way. It depends on the market. If the market is changing, which I've seen it 3 times happening, the seller's expectation is not what the market is at that moment, at that time, and those things happen. So the point I'm trying to make is make sure you underpromise things, so then when it's time to come through, they feel like, oh my gosh, Mark, you're the best. You were able to get me 15,000 more or 10,000 more. We never expected that, but that's very important. How to work with your buyer. Set expectation at the first meeting. It's very important when you first get a referral or you get a person on the phone and you get the first meeting. Try to get the first meeting at your office or somewhere where you have more control of the environment. It's okay too if you have no choice but to meet a client to a particular property, so the initial meeting could be held. But talk about loyalty, honesty, and confidentiality. To me, that's very, very important. Those are intangibles that a lot of people kind of shy away from, and they're talking about analytical numbers and cents kind of scenario or logic and that stuff. People can connect much better with the basic fundamentals of what kind of person they would want to work with. So you have to bear in mind when you're telling stories, like I said, stories are the best things to tell a person you just met, so they get to know you as a person through the stories that you're telling, rather than you actually telling, oh, I've done this and I've done that. You're telling them a story, and in the process of telling the story, they can see exactly what you can do. This is very important as well. Prepare them for the process of loan approval, property search, and negotiation, in that order. So loan approval, to me, I don't even show houses as much as possible, or if I see them on the first house, I try not to get them to go out there again until I know for a fact that they've been approved for a loan. One of the reasons why is I don't want to get them disappointed, and if I'm the one causing the disappointment, guess what? I won't be their agent. So it's very, very important to get them qualified first, and you explain to them why, because you don't want them to go window shopping if they went to a Target or a Walmart or some store, right? You don't want them to not bring their wallet and just look at things and be disappointed that they're not able to purchase because they don't have their wallet with them, where the wallet is the loan. So I kind of put that analogy together just to make sure that they understand that the loan process is as important as purchasing a home, because at the end of the day, we might find something they really like and we might go after it, and if they're not completely prepared on the other side, on the loan side, it's just going to fail because there's no money at the end of the transaction to pay for that home. So I set them up for a loan approval first, and then sit down with them and do the search together rather than by themselves. It's very important for them to actually be involved in the search process, because if you search it yourself and you're missing some things, they may work with another agent who's giving them those things. So how can you miss things if they're the one who searched it with you, right? So if they miss things, then that's their issue, it's not yours at that point, and they would know that. Now, negotiation, how those things work, and the whole process of actually being able to go to settlement. Explain all those things to them, especially if they never bought a house. If they bought a house, of course, you gotta shortcut certain things, and you can tell them, since you've bought a house before, what do you know? To explain to me what you know. So then at least you know what they know, and you know what they don't know. So when searching for property, set up the search for them with them on an auto email. So then after that, basically, it's just adjusting the auto email. And try not to show more than 8 houses at a time. And one of the reasons why is because they start confusing the kitchens, the bathrooms, how many bedrooms, how many facilities that they have in a particular home after they've seen 8 houses in one day. And believe it or not, for me, I've seen this, I've tested this. This is the best number to work with, around 8 to 10 transactions at the most. 8 to 10 houses at the most. You go more than that, people forget what they've seen, and sometimes they confuse one kitchen over the other. So can you imagine that? Now you have to go back out there again, look at the same houses afterwards. It's not as efficient as if you tell them pick the top 8 or top 10 or top 15. If a lot of properties are going under contract, we're going to be looking at 8 houses on that particular day, maybe 2-3 hours or 4 hours at the most. So then you can time block your weekend or time block your week when you're working with them. So, and one thing I tell you, there's a technique in influencing people going one direction or the other. What I do is I tell them how terrible a house is if I know they don't like the house as well. So this is where I gain my trust with them. And I point out those negative things, of course, a lot more negative things on particular houses that I can see that they don't like to begin with. So then I can gain their trust, the fact that I'm not here to sell your home. I'm here to work with you in terms of what the houses you like. So a good example is if you have 4 properties you're looking at and you want this one particular house that you think might be best for them, let's say. It doesn't happen always, but sometimes that does happen, that you know that this house is a house that they might like. Well, you go through all 4 houses. As you're going through the houses, you point out a lot of the negatives on the houses that you know they're not going to pursue. And then when you get to the house that they really like, or the house that you think that they really like, and they go in there and they really like it, then you just point out more positive than negative. And lo and behold, that client all of a sudden is going the direction you want it to go, which is the transaction or the house that you already picked for them. Well, there might be a lot of reasons why you might have picked that house as well. You might have picked that house because you already pre-negotiated with the listing agent, because the listing agent you happen to know. So that makes it much easier for you to actually sell that house. But you don't give them the chance, put it this way, for you to be the one giving them the suggestion. Let them make their own decision. And that's a very important part when you're looking at trying to sell a home out there. Being able to get the other person to make their own decision. Even though you influence their decision so much, but at the same time, you allow them to make that decision. Even though you know the direction they're going to make a decision because you influence that decision, they're still going that direction, but it's them who made that decision. So that's very important. And also, always put yourself on the other person's shoes. So if you want to influence people, you have to be empathetic. Not only empathetic, but you have to understand their position, their perspective, their background, where they're coming from, why they're thinking the way they're thinking. I know you might think there's a lot to think about, but it's really not. But understanding where they're coming from is very important, because if you can understand where they're coming from, then you can maneuver the direction of the communication towards the things that they more than likely will gravitate to. And that's another way to influence people. You influence people based on their own perspective of whatever the situation is. So being able to understand the psychology of where they're coming from makes a huge difference in terms of convincing them a direction that you want them to go. So ask the question, if you were them, how would I make decisions and why? This is the question you would ask. If the answer is something that is compelling and you would volunteer to do what your agent suggested, this is also another thing. Looking at it from them volunteering the answer for you rather than you making the suggestion. So making the suggestion does not allow them to make the decision. What allows them to make a decision is the pros and cons that you're going to show them. So the question of you being the agent, how are you influencing their decision? Is it by making suggestion of what they should decide, or are you influencing them by letting them know the pros and cons of whatever decisions are actually available for them? So it's very important, you have to separate each possible decision they could possibly make, and then look at the consequences behind those decisions that they could make, and then let them come up with it. But like I said, if you want to have them influenced and go a particular direction, then you point out more negative stuff on the other decisions that they could possibly make. And then they're going to come up with their own idea, say, hey, Mark, it's a great idea. I came up with this great idea. Why don't I make this decision to go with this property or go with this price? But in reality, you're the one who directed them there, but you never told them that they should go with that price. So it makes a big difference. So a suggestion versus options. So giving them options is clearly the better way to influence people, because whatever decision they make, they would more than likely stick to it because they committed themselves to that decision. So by showing them a consistent pattern that they could follow, then they would continue that same pattern to the decision that you're trying to get them to make. So are you feeling pushed or pressured to make a decision based on other people's agenda? This is very important for any client that you're working with, that you don't get them to feel like they are pressured to make a particular decision one way or the other. You have to get them to feel that their decision is free from any pressure, especially coming from you. It might be pressures coming from other people. It might be pressures coming from the circumstance they're in, right? But it should not come from you. That's my point. Because if it comes from you, then the client won't feel good about it. And later on, they might come back to you and say, hey, you know what? You forced me. I feel like you forced me to buy this home. Well, if you ever get that client, that's usually trouble, because buying a home is not an everyday thing people do. So you don't want to be in that circumstance. So finally, influencing. This is my quote to you guys. Influence is a balance between letting them make their own decision to follow your direction. So if you want someone to be influenced by you, get them to make a decision based on the direction you want them to make, without them knowing that this is exactly what you're doing. So this is my presentation. This is a sample that I have. As you may see, it says How to Sell Homes Other Fail to Sell. That's the book that I give as a gift. And that's the reciprocity of influence. And this ends our presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to send it here. And that's the end of our presentation.